Hello everybody, my name is Captain Bill Sheehan. I'm your Hackensack Riverkeeper. A little background on Riverkeeper. I started the organization in 1997 with a mission to protect, preserve, and restore the natural, living, and recreational resources of the Hackensack River watershed. Secaucus is my hometown. I've been living in Secaucus for most of my life, and it was living in Secaucus which really got me involved in environmental issues and in advocacy work. Going back to the 90s, there was a lot of pressure being placed upon the town by various agencies and developers that wanted to continue to fill in the wetlands and basically take away, all vestiges of the natural world that we had here in Secaucus. And having grown up here in the 1950s and 60s, I can tell you that Secaucus was a totally different town in those days. There were still active farms in the town when I was a young boy. I went to school in Immaculate Conception School here in Secaucus, and several of the students that were in school with me, they came from farm families, so I was aware of that. Even though my dad wasn't a farmer, he was the farthest thing from it. But I had friends who were farmers and friends who lived in that part of the world. And in the farms, there were two different kinds. Secaucus, when I was growing up, always got a bad rap, generally speaking, about the hog farms that we had. There were several hog farms in the County Avenue, Secaucus Road area. We all knew about them, and we knew the people that ran them. They were local people, and they were important to the town. Several of them became town council members and mayors and that sort of thing. And Henry Kudrowski ran for president one time, So these were civically active people, but also, their product was pork, and so we had the Hague Company down on Secaucus Road, which was an abattoir, a slaughterhouse, where they prepared the pork and, turned it into, ham and chops and all that kind of stuff. Just outside of town, on the other side of the railroad tracks in North Bergen, was the Big Miller slaughterhouse too. So we had a lot of that agricultural, animal-centric agriculture. Up in the north end, where all of the houses are now neatly placed in rows along the roads, there were no roads. Those were farm fields when I was a kid. That's one of the reasons why if you come to Secaucus for the first time and you go to the north end, it's kind of hard to get around up there unless you know where you're going. A lot of the development that started taking place up there, it actually took place before there was what we call municipal land use laws. So if a farmer wanted to subdivide his property, he just did it and ran a road, and whichever direction he wanted that road to go in, that was up to him. So that's why when you're driving through the north end now, you'll be driving along and all of a sudden they'll say, do not enter, you have to turn, and then you have to go 2 blocks over and turn again. A lot of people get lost up there, and some of them have never been heard from again. The river itself was a big part of the town of Secaucus. When I was growing up, I was always told, don't go down by that river. It's horribly polluted, you'll get sick if you go down there. Naturally, we went down there anyway, and somebody once in a while might get a little stomach problem if they get into the water, but for the most part, it wasn't as bad as they were making it out to be. But it did get a terrible reputation as one of the most polluted water bodies in the country. It wasn't Secaucus' fault, most of that pollution. Most of that pollution was washing up the river from Kearney and Jersey City, where it was very industrialized, and some of it was coming downriver from Hackensack and places like that up in Bergen County, where they had a lot of industrial users on and near the river that were basically using the river as a disposal site. In the 90s, when I started Riverkeeper, I was looking to protect and preserve as much of the wetlands, as much of the natural world that we had left, and we were pretty successful. working with the town administration, going all the way back to when Tony Just was mayor. He was the first one to install an environmental committee, and it was under his leadership in the town that we were able to stop some major projects that would have really laid waste to the wetlands, especially at Mill Creek Marsh, which today is a beautiful walkway, and you can go out there and enjoy the wildlife and enjoy just being in the outdoors. At one point, the Hearts Company wanted to build 5,000 housing units there. And, the mayor thought that was excessive, and so did I. And we saw eye to eye on a whole lot of things. Changed the course of history to some degree for the town of Secaucus. The Meadowlands Commission came on the scene in the 1960s, late 1960s, and they were given 3 mandates. The first one was to manage growth. The second one was to preserve the environment in the Meadowlands. And the third one was to have like a way to share the taxes that were collected amongst different towns, because some towns were getting development and some towns weren't, so they had to keep that balanced. And it was the orderly development part of their mission that they took to really hard and fast. And that's why so much of the wetlands and what when I was a boy, we called the swamps, started disappearing. Meadowlands Parkway, American Way, all of these industrial roads that we have down in the south end of town now. When I was a boy, we would pack a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in our pocket and head out into what we called the swamps and explore all day long and come home for dinner. And, get yelled at for smelling like the river, but, it didn't stop us. We loved being outdoors. And to a certain degree, it was like growing up in the country. Even though if you looked over your shoulder, you could see the top of the Empire State Building down Center Avenue. It was still far enough away from the madness that was and is New York that people were comfortable. People hunted, people trapped, people carried on as though it was, as though we were out in the country somewhere, but we were actually in the metropolitan area in Hudson County. The town of Secaucus is an island. Around the town, you have Penhorn Creek coming up from the south. You have Mill Creek coming down from the north, and you have the Hackensack River facing the whole town on the west. So if you come into town, if you leave town, you have to cross a bridge. Some of them are relatively large bridges, like the Turnpike bridges and the Route 3 bridges up by my neighborhood. And then others are very small, and you hardly even notice them, like the ones that go over Penhorn Creek and that kind of thing. So, but believe me, Secaucus is still pretty much an island. And people complain, one of the complaints that people have had in Secaucus for the past 30, 40 years is the flooding that takes place when there's a big storm coming, when there's a lot of rainfall, and especially when there's tidal surge coming up the river from a storm. It could be miles out to sea, but it'll cause the tides to rise. And, we get notices nowadays, move your cars from low-lying areas. And that's because low-lying areas were wetlands at one time. And the water is just seeking its own level, and people are living right where the water wants to be. We didn't have those. We had some problems, like down by Secaucus Road, which was always lowland. But for the most part, Secaucus was a relatively dry town up until all the development came. Wetlands can actually store, during a storm, billions of gallons of water. And, if it doesn't have a wetland to fill up, it's going to fill up somebody's basement. It's going to ruin somebody's business. It's going to ruin somebody's livelihood. And we have to, I kept telling people back back when I started, we got to slow this down. Otherwise, we're all going to be underwater someday. And, thank goodness that we've had some very enlightened leadership in the town, which more or less kept after the Meadowlands Commission and made sure that decisions that were being made by the commission were not going to do any more damage to the natural resources of the town. People don't realize that the wetlands, like the Mill Creek Marsh, for instance, are really the green infrastructure of our town, and all over the country, people are now building green infrastructure to try and make up for all the losses that we had. Rain gardens are great. You wouldn't need rain gardens if we still had the open land, the open spaces, just around the corner from where we are. There was one of the last wooded areas in Hudson County was taken down to build a new high-tech high school. Not to say that the high school isn't a beautiful accomplishment, but I liked it better when it was woodland. There were coyotes in there were deer in there were animals that lived in that part of town that most people that live in, apartments and most people that live in some of the more heavily developed parts of the town wouldn't even realize are here. They're part of our natural resource inventory that we should be protecting and not allowing to go away. Also, while we're on the subject, right around the corner where Laurel Hill Park is, in the 1800s, the county acquired all that, and they built a number of institutions on the hill. There were poorhouses, there were sanitariums for various health issues, there was a lunatic asylum, and then there was a penitentiary back here. And that was all going great guns, but as modern medicine came into being and they found antibiotics that could take care of a lot of those diseases that people were being hospitalized for and being institutionalized for so that they wouldn't spread throughout the community, so the sanitarium started going out of style. And the poorhouses were put out of business by Social Security and unemployment insurance. We stopped warehousing our poor and making them feel like they were criminals just because they didn't have the same financial resources that other people had. And the only thing that was still operating when I was a small boy was the penitentiary. And in 1958, that caught fire, and the county moved all the prisoners out of the penitentiary to the county jail, which was up on Pavonia Avenue. And then the whole facility back here in what today is Laurel Hill Park, it was empty. And the county demolished all the buildings and turned over the property to a company that was going to quarry Laurel Hill. And left to their own devices, they would have completely taken the hill down and it would not even be there anymore. And it's an iconic part of the town, Laurel Hill. It represents, to the natural world, it's one of the few places where you can see vegetation on the hill that doesn't grow any further north on this continent, and other vegetation that doesn't grow any further south on this continent. The Torrey Botanical people from Brooklyn, the big botanical gardens in Brooklyn, they do an inventory every so many years of the vegetation on Laurel Hill, and they know every plant that grows there, and they know exactly how valuable they are to the ecology of the region. Imagine if it was gone. What a loss that would be to the town and to the county and to the region. It's a major landmark now, and after the quarrying stopped, that was when the land laid fallow for many, many years, and I've never seen anything like it on a tax map before or since, where it actually said on the tax map, fallow land, which I thought was very odd. But then Hudson County decided to build a park there in the 90s, and it was dedicated in 1997, the same year that I founded Riverkeeper, coincidentally. And the launch ramp was put in, And now we have a way for people to get out on the river, enjoy the river. We also have a small launch ramp up at Mill Creek Point. Another place that reeks with history. Mill Creek Point, when I was growing up, was known as Tony's Old Mill. And in the 1970s, when the Meadowlands Commission started building everything around, the guy who owned Tony's Old Mill decided he was going to retire and move to Florida. And he sold it to a family from town, and basically they were speculating on its value as real estate. The restaurant fell apart, the marina fell apart. Eventually there were squatters living on the property, living in the back of campers, you know, like small pickup trucks with campers in the back of them, but they didn't have any sewer, and so they were literally polluting the river and polluting the high school marsh just by being there. It was during the Just administration that myself and several members of the environmental committee that was formed by that administration, we did a report to the mayor and council about how important it would be to put a park at Mill Creek Point. The mayor and council totally embraced the idea immediately. And it took a while to convince the property owners that it was in their best interest to sell it for a park, but now it's a beautiful park, and it's the anchor for our park, our walkway along the river. Being a big advocate for public access to the water, one of the ways that we can provide safe access is to have walkways along the river, along the creeks, so that people can get out there and see with their own eyes what's going on. When I started Riverkeeper in the 90s, people laughed. They said, "What are you keeping that river for? Isn't that river nothing but a sewer?" And I had to explain to them about the abundance of natural resources that we have here in the Meadowlands and how important the Meadowlands are. And it didn't take me long to realize that the only way I was ever going to get any traction was to let people see it for themselves. And that's when I started our tour program. I had a small boat. I would take 5 or 6 people at a time out on the river and just let them see the wildlife, let them enjoy the outdoors, let them see how, you know, what an urban wilderness is actually like. And that's what I've always called the Meadowlands, an urban wilderness. You know, that led to Riverkeeper, and then Riverkeeper added 2 boats. Now we have 2 boats that go up and down the river doing tours for people. We've done tours for lots of classes from the schools here in town, for the seniors here in town. This year it's been different because of the coronavirus problem that we're having, but usually every summer we devote a couple of days out of the summer to taking seniors from town out on the river so they can enjoy it and then see it with their own eyes and understand a little bit more about what we're trying to do here. You know, there are problems. There's always going to be problems, but you know, as a riverkeeper, I can tell you that the river is cleaner now than it's been in my entire life. There are more fish swimming in the river now than there were when I was a boy. There was killifish, maybe some eels, and a couple of beat-up old carp. Now there's over 70 species of marine life that can survive and live and thrive in the Hackensack River, including striped bass up to about 40 pounds that get caught on a pretty regular basis. As a matter of fact, as we head into the fall, that becomes a good time to go fishing for striped bass. Of course, we recommend that people catch and release their fish, not because we're fish huggers, but because the fish have the residuals of our post-industrial past that come through the food chain and contaminate the fish, so that if people eat them and they eat them too regularly, people can start carrying around the body burden of those contaminants, and that's not good. That's just not good under any circumstances. For young women, it can actually interfere with the reproductive process, and then when they do have a baby, they can pass some of those contaminants right through their mother's milk to the child, which is a horrible thought, but it has to be said so people understand that they shouldn't be eating these things. 4 years ago, we started doing a fishing derby on the pier down here at Laurel Hill Park, and we actually got one done this year. Against all odds, we did a socially distanced fishing derby, which I thought was an amusing way to fish, but people obeyed the rules, they had a great time, and they caught plenty of fish. So it was a good event. And it'll only get better as time goes on, as the water quality continues to improve. We started a water quality monitoring program this year at Riverkeeper. A number of my staff are trained to go to the river. We have 5 stations between Bayonne and Ridgefield Park, including Laurel Hill Park right here in Secaucus, where they take samples every week, and they do the normal testing, and they also take samples which go to a lab to be analyzed for fecal coliform and Enterococcus, which are indicators of sewage in the water. And so it's been getting cleaner and better, and this monitoring that we're doing is actually supporting the idea that the river is getting cleaner and better all the time. The future of Secaucus and the river lies in the ability for people to understand that this is the only river we have, and if we don't take care of it, we'll lose it again. It was on the brink of total destruction, and now with 275 species of birds and avian species, including bald eagles that are visible up and down the river now. Growing up, the only time I ever saw a bald eagle was on TV, or if we went to a zoo somewhere and they had an old eagle sitting in a cage somewhere. But now, it's a rare trip that we take on the river where we don't see at least one bald eagle, And osprey are another species that came back because there's fish in the river for them to eat. The osprey are coming back into the region, and we now have about between the mouth of the river and up into Bergen County, there's 16 active osprey nests, including one in Secaucus right next to the Portal Bridge on one of the towers there. There's an osprey family that comes in every spring, and they raise their young, and they hunt on the river. It's a wonderful thing for people to see, and especially for younger people. It's one thing to see it on PBS, for instance, but to see it in real life and actually watch that bird go in and grab that fish and fly away with the fish hanging under its belly, so to speak. It's an amazing thing for people to see. And I couldn't see that growing up. It just wasn't happening here because of the pollution. We have a whole menu of events that we do every year. Our river cleanup program, last year we did 40 cleanups, but because of COVID this year, we're only doing our 4th cleanup this coming weekend up in the Oradell Reservoir, which is where everyone in Secaucus gets their water from, by the way. Our water supply is the Hackensack River, and the reservoirs were built in the early 20th century, and they were built by the Hackensack Water Company, and then it became United Water. Now it's Suez, and they're doing a great job. They treat the water very well, and any water that comes out of your tap is perfectly potable water. I get one of my biggest gripes with people is when I see people walking with cases and cases of bottled water, because all that does is, they're not selling water, they're selling plastic bottles is what they're doing. And you can take a stainless steel bottle and you can fill it up at the tap and have the best water that you can get your hands on, if as long as you do the right thing. There's no known reason to buy bottled water, especially bottled water in plastic bottles, because you know where they wind up? They wind up in the river, and they wind up in piles. And once they're in the river, they can't even be recycled. Once they're in the river and they come out of the river coated with the mud that is potentially contaminated, the recyclers don't even want them because they're afraid that it will contaminate their production line. So, stay away from bottled water. Use tap water. We have a great provider, and they provide us with very clean and healthy water.